Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Saturday Conversations, a podcast where we can go a little bit deeper with many folks familiar around the Pittsburgh sports scene. The Penguins wrapped up their season on Thursday, so I wanted to talk a lot of hockey this week. Who better to do it with than the guy on the other side of the screen? Paul Steigerwald is in. Stigy, I believe your 45th year with the organization. Is that correct?
Yeah, that would be right. That's exactly right.
Amazing.
I started in March of 1980.
Wow. All right, so you started out in marketing. You've done play-by-play, color commentary on radio and TV. You've done absolutely everything. These days you work as a communication specialist, hosting pre and post game stuff, Penguins Live, whole bunch more. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. I like it. You know, I'm not, as far as I'm concerned, Jason, I haven't worked a day in my life, except maybe when I was doing the marketing stuff and I was coming in pretty early in rush hour traffic every day back in the early 80s. But, you know, with the Penguins, I don't consider it work. I've loved hockey since I was about 15 years old, and I wanted to be in hockey from that point on, and tried a few other things along the way until I settled in with the Penguins. And it's really kind of weird that I'm still there after all these years because, you know, a lot of people switch jobs, I've switched jobs, if you will, or roles with the Penguins, but I've been with the same organization all these years. And it's kind of made time fly by, to be honest with you, because nothing really changes all that much. So I feel like I've just been in the same place for 45 years, which I have.
Cool. Well, in today's show, we're going to talk about the Penguins' current season. Want to talk about what needs to happen over the summer, a little bit about Sidney Crosby. Mainly want to get into Stigy's path from what he referenced, the marketing director, all through a bunch of different roles and just the amazing longevity that you've achieved, Stigy. Before that, though, I do want to let you know that this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder and Associates. Law firms come and go, but what law firm has been here in Western Pennsylvania fighting for injury victims for more than 40 years? Edgar Snyder and Associates. What firm has a staff of over 130 people who live and work here? Edgar Snyder and Associates. Law firms come and go, but Edgar Snyder and Associates is a name you can always trust. Remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. If you've been hurt in an accident, call them at 1-800-94-EDGAR or visit them at edgarsnyder.com. They're available 24/7. All right, Stigy, let's get started with a little current Penguins talk. We're recording this before their final game of the season. They were 9-5-2 over their last 16 going into it. We've seen some progress. Obviously, people want them to win, get back into the playoffs, all that stuff. How close do you think they are to doing that?
I'm not really sure. It's hard for me to put my finger on it because I know what you mean by progress in the sense that they seem to have switched course a little bit in terms of trying to stock their farm team and add some players, some younger players who could play for the Penguins in the future and contribute. What kind of an impact these players will make will be remains to be seen. I'm a little bit cautious about promising big things from the players. I'm probably most excited about Sergei Murashov, the goalie.
Yeah,
he's still really young. I like the other players that we've seen. I think Rutger McGroarty is going to be able to make a nice contribution. So when you talk about progress, I think that's the big thing, is that out of necessity and really because it just was a matter of course, you know, it had to happen. Kyle Dubas realized he had to start getting some younger players and draft picks together because we had just completely made the cupboard bare during the Jim Rutherford years, the last couple of years where he kept moving picks and trying to win more cups. So Kyle had to pivot from the previous regime's philosophy. And I think by doing that, he's done a pretty good job. I mean, as far as getting picks and making the farm team a little bit more competitive and making it more like a team that would ultimately feed players to the big club. So those are the areas of progress. In terms of where they're going in terms of point totals, things of that nature, to get back to being a real competitor, I still think we're a ways away from that.
Yeah. One of the areas, Stigy, I think maybe it's talked about enough, maybe it's not. What can happen this offseason? I mean, the cap going up, I think there's some pivotal moves. I don't know if Kyle's going to be able to move a Tristan Jarry contract, Erik Karlsson, Ryan Graves. I mean, they're certainly in a tough spot with some of that stuff. But when you look at what sort of chess pieces you need to move around this summer, in addition to the young players that you're talking about, what needs to happen?
Man, it's such a daunting task because of those names you mentioned. To me, it's a question of philosophy too.
How so?
Yes. I think if you look at like a guy like Erik Karlsson, he was a case of doubling or tripling down on the previous philosophy that always held with the Penguins. the DNA philosophy. That offense is everything for the Penguins, and our best defense is offense. Mike Sullivan, when he came along, he played what I call a full court press back in 2016.
Yeah.
And it was a really cool system because it just required players to just skate and pressure the puck all over the ice. You tended to tilt the ice, and they were able to keep the defenders in the offense in their own defensive zones for long stretches of time. And they were able to chase down players when they went back the other way. It was a lot of backtracking, that kind of defense, as opposed to setting up a structure where you have to go through layers of people to get to the Penguins' net. It was more about pushing people up ice, staying above them, getting on them, and then if they did get possession of the puck, chasing them down. And if you remember, they'd get to the red line, and teams literally couldn't get past center ice.
Yeah,
and the Penguins would turn the puck back into the offensive zone. They would go. It was incredible, and they were out shooting teams. This was on the way to that first cup. Now, that was a bit of a shock to everybody's system in the NHL. Nobody else was doing that. Everybody else kind of followed suit. And then a lot of teams went back to playing a more passive, defensive, structured kind of a game, staying above people. So it's a philosophical thing. When you bring in a guy like Erik Karlsson, he's going to turn the puck over as much as he's going to make great plays. And if you're not prepared to be able to get back and cover for mistakes that are made by a guy like that, you're in big trouble. And I don't think you can win with Erik Karlsson. That's just my opinion based on what I've seen of him and what I've seen of his track record in the National Hockey League. So what do you do about that, Jason? I mean, Kyle Dubas doesn't like to buy people out. He said that on multiple occasions.
Yep.
That philosophy could change based on the fact that the salary cap's going up, because he's going to have more runway to be able to offset the salaries that he's going to have to eat for a while. Would he do that? I don't think so. I think he's just going to try to find a way to live with Erik Karlsson and try to keep adding pieces that can make the team overall more deep and perhaps ultimately better defensively, and basically be a team that can play pretty well outside of the top line of Crosby and, in this case, Rustin and Raquel. And if you could have that formula of a top line like that, and then everybody else play solid two-way hockey, you might be able to start making progress in the standings. That's how I see it. It's a conundrum, because I don't think Ryan Graves, I'm not sure you can win with him either, playing a lot of minutes. So, in fact,
you think they can trade Jarry?
I'm going to say just right out, I don't think you can win with him either as one of your key defensemen. He's been a huge disappointment.
Yeah.
So, and Jarry is a different story. I've always walked that line with Jarry. I think a lot of people were. 1 minute I think he can, he's a pretty good NHL goalie. He could play 60 games at a high level and really be a guy that could help you win every night. And then other times I feel like you can't trust him. But I think since going back to maybe late last season, that's when he started to fade. He had always been way above 500 his record, but suddenly he went below 500, and then it got worse this year at the beginning of the season to the point where he had to be waived. But guess what? Tom Barrasso was sent to Rochester too back in the day by the Buffalo Sabres, and he ended up coming back and playing pretty well in Pittsburgh. So you just never know with goalies. I do think Jarry has some flaws in his game, but I do also think that he's probably better than people think he is.
I should call up Tommy and have him relay thoughts on that experience. That's actually probably not going to go well. All right. So let me ask you about Sid, Stigy. You've seen a lot of players. You've seen a lot of great players. Obviously, Sid ranks up there. One sort of a fun question, how long do you think he can keep doing this? And two, what has created his amazing longevity? Like, he's still doing it. He's still elite. He's still all of these things. Just, if somebody was dropped on this planet from Mars and you had to explain Sidney Crosby to him, what would that be like?
Well, I consider him like a computer-generated hockey player. Like, he's got every element of the game he's aware of and what he has to do to make it work for him.
Yeah,
he's kind of found the secret sauce, I think, in a way, in the sense that he is such an incredibly high hockey IQ that he basically goes down each item one by one, and he masters them so that he's good at everything. He's not spectacular at anything. And in terms of like you think of Connor McDavid, he's spectacular at rushing the puck, where every time he picks it up, he's flying it at 100 miles an hour. but can he do all the other little things that Sid can do? I would say no. I'm not saying he's not capable of it, but Sid, a lot of it is what he identified as the things that he had to be good at to be that complete player that he is.
Yeah.
And then he works at it every day. So, and then, you talked about the conditioning part of it, where he's made himself a tremendously conditioned athlete for hockey. Yeah. And you put those things together. But the big thing for him, I think, is his passion for doing that. He competes against himself. And and there's a standard that he sets for himself. And I think he's smart enough to know that standard could come down based on his age, so that he's not going to be one of those guys who, when he reaches a certain point in age, he might go, I can't do this anymore. This is no fun because I can't do the things I used to do. I think he'll be more of a guy who will say, I'll do anything I can do at this point in my trajectory to be the best player I can be under the circumstances. He'll kind of transform himself into something else that still makes an impact on the team. So my guess is he plays into his 40s.
Same.
Because I just think that's what he's going to want to do. That's going to be the next thing that he tackles. The next big challenge in his career will be to prove that he's that guy too, that can play for many years at a high level. And it'll be legendary in that respect, like Jagr is, like Gordie Howe was. Mm-hmm. He's going to be in that category, I think.
I agree with you. I could see Sid playing until he's 45. It wouldn't shock me if as long as, health, knock on wood, as long as everything cooperates, man. I mean, he's got the game for it. He's got the head for it. He's got the passion for it. All of it a lot. I don't want to, count chickens before they hatch, but he has a game that ages very well, and we've already seen it.
I agree, and I think a lot of it is going to be what expectations are for him and for himself. And he's going to have to adjust those expectations, I believe. And I think he's already doing that to a certain extent. So I don't see why he wouldn't continue that path of just making the right adjustments in his game to be able to continue to make an impact on the team in the way that he can. Maybe he'll be a third-line center at some point, like Brian Trottier was.
Yeah.
Something like that. And, I was on with Madden once, and he said, he would never do that. He's not going to do what Trottier did. And I said, and I didn't have a chance to answer him, but I why not? Why wouldn't he do that? It's if he wants to play hockey in the NHL and he still can contribute at a very significant level and in a significant way to his team, he's going to continue to do it because he loves playing the game. That's all he really. I mean, he's married to hockey. Let's face it. He's got a beautiful girlfriend. Don't get me wrong, but he loves the game of hockey more than anything else. From the time he was a little kid, a tiny kid, he's loved the game. And I don't think that has changed one bit.
All right, so I want to get into your story, Stigy, your history with the Penguins, your love of hockey and all that stuff. First, we have a message, though, from the Bradenton Area Convention and Visitors Bureau.
Embrace the laid-back charm of island life while sinking your toes in the sand and discovering real, authentic Florida in the Bradenton area. Unspoiled beauty and pristine beaches, a vibrant waterfront downtown energized by local arts and culture, fresh Floridian cuisine with a flourish of rich history, and friendly locals ready to welcome you to this preserved paradise on Florida's Gulf Coast. Plan your visit today at BradentonGulfIslands.com.
And welcome back to Saturday Conversations with Paul Steigerwald. Steig, you referenced this at the beginning, but you grew up here. I believe you lived either across the street, down the street, something like that, from the former Penguins GM, Jack Riley, and he would give you guys tickets for games that were not well attended. I'm guessing that contributed to it, but where'd you find the love of hockey? Where did this come from?
Well, if I think about my DNA, I would say that some of this has to do with the fact that my mother's Canadian, but that's more intrinsic. And yet, I had a cousin named Pat McDermott and Mike McDermott, the McDermotts, and their dad was Claire McDermott, Mickey, they called him, in Mount Lebanon. He was greatly responsible for really kind of pushing Mount Lebanon to build that rink that's still there over there near Mount Lebanon Park. And Pat turned out to be one of the better players to really play in Pittsburgh from that era. He was really a good player. He played for a while with a traveling team called the Pittsburgh Knights, and Dee Rizzo's dad, Donnie Rizzo, and his brother played for that team, and they were actually a pretty good team. And Pat was a good player. So I went skating with the McDermotts when I was in like fourth grade, and I got a little feel for that. And then along comes high school, ninth grade, and I find out through my buddies who I walked up to the bus with every day that Barb Riley was going to Our Lady of Grace School with one of the little brothers of my friends. And she is the daughter of Jack Riley, the general manager of the Penguins, who happens to live the street below us in Birdland, which is a little neighborhood in Scott Township where all the streets are named after birds. I lived on Raven Drive, and Jack Riley lived on Grouse Drive. They should change the name to Penguins Drive because that's where he lived for a long time. Yeah. He was still living there up until his death. So my dad would drive us to the games, and my buddies, we would go down to the Riley house. Mrs. Riley would come to the door with these yellow coupons and whatever we needed, and she'd give them to us, and we would redeem those for tickets. I did that for 35 games in 69-70. I completely fell in love with hockey at that point. Then we all wanted to play it, so I was a part of that very first year of high school hockey in Pittsburgh with South Hills Catholic High School, and there were a few other teams. Mount Lebanon was one of them. Pat played for that team, Pat McDermott. So that was kind of the beginning of the growth of my interest in hockey. I was a passion that I really developed for the game. And then when in eighth grade, I had said I wanted to be a broadcaster when we had to do a vocation theme. And then when I heard hockey announcers on the radio, I said, that's really what I'd like to do. And my brother John and I, we loved Bob Prince. We used to impersonate him and go in the backyard and pretend we were Bob Prince, like kids pretend they were Mike Lange later. So I wanted to do that. And then so it was the marriage of my love for hockey and my desire to do broadcasting that got me into hockey broadcasting at an age when nobody else really cared a whole lot about hockey in Pittsburgh. So I was lucky. I was ahead of the curve. If I tried to jump into that today, it would be much more difficult.
Stigy, one thing I think is amazing about your story is sort of how you started in something and then it quickly changed and you had to adjust. What I'm talking about, like you go to work for the Penguins, you're working under a guy named Dan LaRose. You know this. I'm just saying for viewers and listeners. 2 weeks later, he leaves for a job at the Meadows. You're not doing any color commentary, and then Terry Schiffmeyer, I believe, stepped aside, retired, something like that. 84, I want to say, and then you jumped into that. Like you've had to pivot a couple times along the way too. There have just been like these crazy circumstances that you've had to adjust quickly. I think that's impressive. Just how have you been able to do that, and what are your sort of memories of those?
Well, I think it began with my desire to be kind of a team player. I realized I was told by a teacher that I had at Kent State University not to be monomaniacal, is the word he used. In other words, to be into one thing only. There was another guy who we went to school with who ended up in the NHL, who my teacher referred to as being monomaniacal. All he cares about is hockey, Paul. You got to, so. But it worked for him. He got to the NHL, but I think that was part of it. But also at Kent State, there were two guys, Mike Fornes, who went on to call games for the Washington Capitals and Dallas Stars, and Rick Peckham. So the three of us were all working together at Kent State University back in the early 70s. And I couldn't crack the play-by-play role because those two guys had it wired in already. They were from Ohio, both of them. And so I did color with Rick Peckham, who won the Foster Hewitt Award as the longtime voice of the Tampa Bay Lightning. You may remember him. Really good broadcaster. So I was his partner. So I was doing color in college already. So when I went to the Penguins, I wanted to do play-by-play because I had done 1 year play-by-play in Johnstown for the Johnstown Red Wings in the Eastern Hockey League. But when I went to the Penguins, I took my little radio in with me. It was like a little mini blue box with a cassette in it. I played it for Paul Martha. And they also knew that I had sold radio time. I sold time in the late 70s, for a couple different radio stations in Pittsburgh. And that's what prepared me for my marketing job. So when I took that job, it was a job of versatility right from the start. And so I just did color. And then when Terry Schiffmeyer stepped aside, I had already had experience at doing color in the college level, and they knew that I could probably do it. And to be honest with you, I was way in over my head, but I pulled it off. I mean, be working alongside of Mike Lange at that time. It's just, I can't believe I did it. I was kind of a prodigy. I guess I looked like I was about 16 years old, when I went on the air at first. And I knew when I listened to myself, my voice sounded young, and it just, it's a kind of a miracle really that I ended up on the air when I did. But I did kind of have a feel for the game. I still don't think even to this day that I know some of the things that I should know about hockey, but I know that I had a feel for the game from having played it and loved it for so many years. So I kind of pulled it off. That's kind of the way I looked at it. Mike Lange said, it takes you 5 years, Stigy, to get good. 5 years. It took me about 10. Yeah. Before I felt like when I was working with Mike Lange, and this would have been right the 95-96 season when we had that quadruple overtime game against the Washington Capitals, and Peter Nedved scored the winning goal. That's when I felt like Mike and I were really kind of working together with the same, I'm not going to say on his level, but I was worthy of working with Mike Lange. That's when I first felt like I was worthy of it. So believe it or not. And that was a long time after I started.
Well, that would have to be just so darn intimidating, Stigy. Like you said, like, hey, you're just dropped next to Mike Lange. Like, you can do all the prep work you want. That's just a tough thing. And I also have a tremendous amount of respect for how you've done the job over the years with kind of an unconventional path to color commentary, too. Like a lot of these guys, Borky, Erie, whomever, they played the game. And you played, but just not in the NHL. And so you had to kind of go a different route. You don't see very many color commentators who are non-players. And I know that was sometimes a challenge for you trying to find that niche or thread the needle, or however you want to say it. But, I don't know. I think it contributed to your colorful storytelling and knowledge of the game and all the things you add. But, how did you go about doing that? What was your process like for that?
Well, that's a good question, because really it's the reverse, because actually when I did it, there were more guys doing that kind of thing in broadcasting. You think of Myron Cope. He didn't play the game, and he did, color on radio for the Steelers. So there were other people who hadn't played the sport. Howard Cosell would be another one on the national level, who were getting an opportunity to be color analysts. In fact, Howard Cosell was really down on the fact that, that they were putting nothing but former athletes in the booth. He called it the jockocracy. I don't know if you remember that term.
Yeah, I do.
But I actually was okay with it at first. But then I realized as more and more former players began to filter into the telecasts on hockey. And don't forget now, hockey wasn't really televising a lot of games back then. They were doing mostly radio. And, we would do 12 to 15 games when I first started. We ended up doing a little bit over 20 games with KDKA before the advent of cable TV, when we televised every single game. But for the most part, these teams in the United States weren't televising that many games. So the role on radio was kind of different than the role on TV. In any event, I started to feel really like unworthy, because I thought, I'm not a former player. I'm miscast here. I shouldn't be doing this job. And I started to feel like people didn't think I had the level of credibility that is required for that job. So what happened was more and more former hockey players started to filter into the television business, because they started televising more games, and it became more of an opportunity for players to get into broadcasting. So as that happened, I started watching people like Bill Clement and John Davidson and the other guys that were doing what I did, and they were all former players. And I started realizing, this isn't good for me. Someday I'm not going to be doing this. And I wanted to do play-by-play anyway, but we did a simulcast, Jason. That's the thing. We always simulcasted. And I understand that Mike Lange was so big, but once Fox Sports came along, and actually, when Howard Baldwin sold the rights, that's when they decided to split TV and radio. So that's when they needed a new play-by-play guy for the radio side. Yeah. They gave the job to Doug McLeod. Then they gave the job to Matt McConnell. And then the Penguins went into bankruptcy. Matt McConnell took a job in Atlanta. Mario was in charge, Chuck Greenberg and people around him. And I was able to convince them to finally give me an opportunity to do radio play-by-play. And that happened in '99. So that's when I switched back over to doing what I really wanted to do. But I never had any delusions about replacing Mike Lange on radio, on TV, on Earth. It just was one of those things that happened.
Yeah, and I've always thought that you've handled that with a whole bunch of class. I know that people externally know about it. Like, what are you supposed to say? No, like you take a job, and it's a weird, unfortunate situation. But I don't know. I look at it. There's two legendary broadcasters with the Penguins, obviously more. But let me ask you this. About the radio play-by-play and play-by-play in general. That was always your first love, right? I was reading, too, that even took you to Altoona at one point doing baseball games, correct? And I looked that up last night.
I got lucky there, too, because the lockout came in 04-05, and I was getting divorced, and I was pretty down, and Chuck Greenberg was the owner of the Altoona Curve, and he and I had become friends, and he called me up and said, how would you like to do baseball up here this year? Our guy's leaving, Rob Egan. He said, why don't you take this job? I said, man, I don't know if I could do baseball anymore, because I kind of lost my love for baseball with the way things had gone with the Pirates, and I was so immersed in hockey, but I grew up listening to Bob Prince and everything, so I figured I'll give it a shot. It took me, I was a little scared, to be honest with you, even at the minor league level, to do it. But there was a guy there named Jason Dombach in Altoona, who's a phenomenal PR guy and a pretty good broadcaster too. I wish the Pirates would have given him a look when he tried to get that job in Pittsburgh. But Jason is now married to the coach of the women's soccer team at Penn State. She's very successful. He's a really good guy. But anyway, he really held my hand a little bit up there in Altoona, and I did a couple seasons of Altoona baseball. The first year, I didn't want to ride on the bus with the team because they were like playing that music, merengue music and stuff in the back of the bus, and I couldn't take it. So I said, I'm going to drive myself. So I drove 10,000 miles in my car that summer.
Oh my God!
And we went to, I went to Portland, Maine, and Manchester, New Hampshire, and Bowie, Maryland, and Binghamton, New York, and Erie, and those cities to do baseball, and it was very cool. I mean, I really liked it. It was a great experience. The Altoona people, Todd Parnell was the GM up there. It was awesome. It was an awesome experience. Really helped me, especially in what was going on in my personal life. It just was I did a lot of thinking driving 10,000 miles. But,
I bet.
Jason, it was good. I think it was good for my credibility. I mean, I remember Shelley Anderson was working for the Post-Gazette at that time, and she wrote a story on me about going to Altoona. And so it kind of gave people in the broadcasting world, management world, a different view of me.
Yeah.
And I think that helped me get my TV job when I got it. I mean, I think it kind of gave me some credibility that were the Fox people, when they put me on TV, felt like I was worthy of it. It's just funny how that stuff works.
It is. I remember thinking that and feeling that whenever I left the Penguins beat to go to the Pirates. Like, people, one, thought I lost my mind, but two, like, you have different motivations. Mine wasn't a divorce or anything like that, but I had lost my dad, something I always wanted to do, and I feel like I found something that I never knew was present inside me. And not that you're going to go run off and be a Pirates broadcaster, but I guarantee that helped you. Like you're saying, it helped people see you differently. I'm guessing it helped you see your job differently, and
no question
how you called Penguins games.
Listen, you have to take your fears head on. It was one of those things where I stepped into a realm that I really wasn't necessarily prepared for right away. But what I did, my nephew told me to listen to XM satellite radio broadcasts of baseball, because MLB had its own channel right on XM.
Yep, still does.
So what I did, before I went to Altoona to start that season, spring training was underway in Major League Baseball. So I listened to some spring training games, and I kept score. See, I had never kept score of a baseball game. I never did that. Some people do that in the stands.
Oh,
I had never really done that. So I'm keeping score on my couch while I'm listening to the game, just to get used to that. So when I got there, I was more prepared, to hit the ground running, if you will. And it didn't take me too long, but I'm telling you, Jason, there's so much about baseball. You're covering it now. That game is so much more complex, and there's so many things I don't know about it. It's scary, really. You think watching it all your life, but when you get into the sport, you get around managers, and you realize some of the rules that you don't know. It's pretty daunting, actually.
All right, so I want to talk to Stigy a little bit more about his career, why he keeps doing this. He could theoretically retire, but Stigy's going to do this for a long, long time, we all hope. Before that, though, we have a message from one of our sponsors, another one of our sponsors, UFC Gym. April is Stress Awareness Month, and studies show that even one group exercise class a week can significantly reduce stress, so there's no better time to move your body and reset your mind at UFC Gym. However you blow off steam, they've got it. They've got boxing, kickboxing, Zumba, MMA, HIIT, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, muscle makeover, spin, yoga, cardio, barre, youth classes, and silver sneakers, ready to feel stronger inside and out. Drop in this week for UFC Gym Market Square or the Waterfront to try a class for free. All right, Stigy, you could theoretically retire. I don't think you ever want to do that. I think you're having too much fun. Is that a fair assessment? How long you want to keep doing this?
Well, first of all, Jace, you're pretty good at reading spots. Maybe
thanks, man.
Do some of those. You're getting good at it. No, I don't want to retire anytime soon necessarily. Yeah. I traveled the world, not the world, but I traveled the U.S. and Canada for 33 years. We did get to go to Stockholm, and I went to Japan, with the Penguins. And so I don't have that wanderlust. I've been to Ireland, but so I, like a lot of the retired people who work real hard all their lives, and then they figure I got to retire so I get to do the things I never got a chance to do. Well, I got a chance to do a lot. So I feel like I've lived a charmed life and had a charmed career. So in that respect, I'd like to keep it going. It's something I love to do. I'm not going to say that I don't know how to do anything else, because there are other things I could do, I suppose. But I like doing this. It's really fun. It keeps me young. I like being around young people. And it's still that competitive juices flow, when I get on the air and do the shows. I don't mail anything in. I try my best to do the best pregame show I can do. Post-game's a little tougher because you have to analyze the game, and sometimes you got to be critical, and I'm not really I never loved that. That's one of the things I didn't like about doing colors. I had to be that guy criticizing players, which I felt a little uncomfortable with because you're traveling with them. It's a fine line you got to walk. But I just like doing it, Jason. I'm just going to keep doing it, and as long as I can. I think I sound young on the air. I don't think I sound any older or on the air that I ever did. Great. So I'm not worried about that part of it. When they took me off television, David Morehouse said, "We're getting younger. We're going with the brand." That was his description of why they were replacing me. So that isn't really why he wanted to. He didn't like my work. He just didn't want me doing it anymore. Let's be honest. That's okay. That's his prerogative. He was in charge of the team at the time. So, but I think what happened to me was Josh Getzoff was doing what I'm doing now, and Mike Lange got ill, and Josh started doing games and proved that he could do it. So that left an opening for the pre and post game shows, and that's how I jumped in there. And I had really never hosted shows like that. Like maybe intermissions, but not a full blown show where I had to write a script and all that kind of stuff. Not at least not significantly. So it was a new endeavor for me, which I totally loved doing. I like it, and so I'm going to keep doing it as long as they're willing to have me.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. All right. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about some favorite stories that you had around the Penguins. I mean, the one that everybody tells with you, of course, picking up Mario from the airport, driving him in, pointing out the city. And I'm not meaning to downplay that. I'm just saying that's, you've probably told that 50,000 times or something like that. What are some lesser hits? What are some other stories that your mind that you absolutely love? It makes you smile. It makes you laugh. Something that you're really proud of.
Well, there are a couple. Like we did the Boys of Winter campaign, and if you remember, we had a photograph taken of a handful of players, and you can find it. It's out there. I've got it on my phone. It's a group of guys who were with the team at that time: Dave Hannon, Pat Graham, Doug Shedden, Steve Gatsos, Mike Bullard. They're pictured, and we took the picture in one of those meeting rooms at a hotel in Niagara Falls, New York. Now, why were we there? Because that's where they had the Molson slow pitch softball tournament every year, and every NHL team would send their players to this Molson slow pitch. It was sponsored by Molson. Okay, well, they would drink ridiculous amounts of beer. These are NHL hockey players. Yeah. And their teams, it was they're competitive guys. You know that. So the games were very competitive.
And they can also drink. I know that.
And they could drink. So the Philadelphia Flyers were the best team. They were a really good softball team. The Penguins had a kind of a mediocre. Well, it was just like hockey. So I go up there with the guy that we do that did our graphic arts and stuff and produced all of our collateral material. His name's Gary Adams. He worked with a firm called Vance Wright and Adams at that time. He's a very, very talented guy. And he and another guy from his name was Tarmo Vance Wright and Adams. Those two went with me. We took a van and we went up. We took a photograph of the players to make for this ad. Well, when we got there, the players were already done playing for the day, softball, and they were drinking at this area outside this hotel, or motel, really.
Yeah.
They're running around like punching each other in the face, but not real hard, Jace, but hard enough. I still remember Pat Graham, boom, punching me right in the jaw. Like it hurts. They're hockey players. I'm just some little weasel that's up here trying to get something done.
Yeah.
Boom, they're running around punching each other and acting like children. And they were mostly half in the bag by the time we shot this picture down in this room. So that picture you see of the Boys of Winter, keep in mind it was taken during this crazy slow, which, by the way, is no longer sanctioned by the National Hockey League. They would never allow such a thing today. Yeah. That was a completely typical thing of the way hockey was back then. We're talking about in the early 80s. And then the other story I have for you, Jace, is not so pleasant. It was I spent the last hour of Baz Bastien's career in his office with him at the Civic Arena. He didn't know how to get down to Froggies that night. It was the Masterton candidate was being named. It was Greg Malone. There was a little dinner that the hockey writers put on in the meeting room at Froggies. And I led Baz Bastien down there. He didn't know how to get there, so he drove behind me. But I talked in his office with him for an hour about his career. He told me about how his friend Larry Wilson had died. He was running and fell, and He said they didn't know if he died of a heart attack or from hitting his head on a rock. And I still remember him telling me that. We go down to this dinner. Baz drinks too much. The air was very thick because the Penguins had a horrible season. EJ and Baz were there. They got into a little bit of an argument. And Baz went off into the night, and he drove home, and he was going up the Parkway West, and he hit a couple on a motorcycle, and his car crashed into a median, and they found him, a gash in his head. He had a heart attack. He had just told me in his office about how he had heart surgery when he was 40 years old, and he never felt better, and all this stuff. And then they, in the autopsy, they said they weren't sure if he died of a heart attack or from the blow to the head. Exact same thing he had told me about Larry Wilson. So, I spent the last hour of Baz Bastien's career in his office with him on the night that he died, which is a very, very dark night in the history of Pittsburgh. That was the Ides of March in 1983.
Oh boy. Yep. I remember reading about that and was not alive, but yeah. All right. We'll get out of here on this. Maybe a little more positive note here, but if you had to construct the Penguins Mount Rushmore, what would it be?
Mount Rushmore Penguins. Well, Mario would be up there for sure. And then it would be Sidney Crosby, Jaromir Jagr, and
I know the fourth one's tough, right?
Yeah, but I got to give it to Evgeni Malkin, to be honest with you. I do. I know the reason he didn't get the top 100 players is the same reason why I paused for a minute. And that's unfortunate because he should be one of the top 100 for sure. I don't think there's any question about that. That was a travesty.
Right.
But but there's a lot of great people that have come through Pittsburgh, but I'd have to say that those would be my guys.
Yeah. The numbers, the winning, the legacy. I mean, you think of him behind Sid, but you shouldn't. If he was on any other team, that's a Mount Rushmore kind of player.
I do remember totally Bob Airy and I, sometimes on the air, talking about how, he might be the best player in the world right now. Like, we would say, which one's better? I mean, there was a couple times there during the course of Sid's and Gino's careers where you could argue the point.
I mean, I think back, like if they wouldn't have wound up on the same team together, what would that rivalry have been like? I mean, it's a lot like Sid and Ovi, but can you imagine a fantasy land where Ovechkin was, or where Malkin was on, whatever other team, like divergent styles, completely different approaches. Those guys are going to be thought of as two of the best players going head to head all the time in the same sort of storylines. Instead, they're on the same team. It's, Malkin handles it with utmost class, all that stuff. So
I agree. I think Malkin was lucky to have Sid, that he didn't have to deal with the media and all the stuff that goes along with being a captain, which he probably would have been eligible for if he had been on another team. So I think in some ways, and and maybe, I don't know, maybe on the other side of that same coin, maybe he would have developed a little bit differently too had he been that guy that had that responsibility. It might have actually been good for him on some level.
What do you mean?
Well,
that's an interesting idea.
When you're playing for another team and they make you the guy, you've got to be the guy. You got to get good at being the guy that represents your team. You got to be good with the media. You can't hide. He was able to kind of hide behind that Sidney Crosby thing where he didn't have to deal with it. But it's just like what we were talking about earlier about being given different challenges and accepting them and tackling them and being more happy with yourself that you were able to accomplish it. That could have been another area that he probably could have been better at, right, through his career. And it might have made him a better teammate, even a better player.
Yeah.
And that's saying something because was a great player. I mean, he's an unbelievable hockey player.
Mr. 101. Mr. 101.
Yes.
Stigy, this is awesome, man. Thanks so much for joining me. Appreciate it. Loved hearing your story. Love talking hockey. I'm going to miss being away from it for a couple of months, but everybody needs an off season. Thank you.
Okay, Jason, always great seeing you and talking to you. You're one of the real smart guys in the journalism business, and I think it's cool that you're doing
smart
this.
Alec.
No, it's cool that you're doing this because you got some talent maybe for some things that you don't even realize you have.
Thank you, man. I appreciate that. To our viewers and listeners and all those people, make sure you like and subscribe. You can get all of this and so much more. Saturday Conversations and YouTube and podcast coverage across all of our beats. We'll talk to you next Saturday. For Paul Steigerwald, I'm Jason Mackey. Thanks for watching Saturday Conversations.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.
Thank you again, Stigy.
Okay, Jace, take care.
Appreciate it,
Can you
man.
still hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, that's pretty cool. That streaming service is pretty cool. I screwed it up. I'm sorry about that. I hope you can edit that.
No, man, you're fine. We get that. That's an easy in and out. Not a problem.
Okay. I didn't like to bring you down with the bad story, but that's one that is singular to me. I mean, there's nobody else that would have experienced that. That's one of those things that you can't even wrap your head around. But you had to be there. It was really unbelievable.
Yeah.
A dark day in Penguins history, but you can't talk about the Penguins without also talking about some of those things.
Some of the bad, man. I mean, we probably could have gotten into a lot more of that, but
yeah,
we got so much time.
I know. Okay, we'll do it again sometime.
All right. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Bye.
For sure. Bye.